I said, Lady Thatcher, I appreciate that. Had he been elected in 1976, the Cold War would still be going on, the Berlin Wall would still be up, and we'd be nowhere. She said, why would you say that? I said, but I believe God chooses his moments, chooses his people, and chooses his time. In 1980, Lady Thatcher, where were you? Where was Lech Walesa? Where was Václav Havel? Where was Helmut Kohl? And where was Mikhail Gorbachev?
Thank you so much for taking time to do this today. This is such a big honor for me. And thank you so much also for being at both of my events at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. To have you there in the front row, I mean, meant the world. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank my son, Cameron, you know, who follows you and loves your podcast and what have you. And he said, hey, you got to read Jack Carr. You've got to do this, right? I said, okay. And so he was at the first one we got together.
Yep.
But now he's got 3 kids. He's got the 2 girls. He's got the boy. And he was so sorry he couldn't make it to the last one because he had the girls in cheer on Mondays and what have you. But he sends his best, and he'll be watching this, of course.
Well, I have a question about Cameron later on.
Oh, yeah.
But please give him my best as well. Tell him I said hello, and I look forward to seeing him next time.
You got it.
All right. Well, I have so many questions for you. I know we're never going to get to all of them. And I have these books right here. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, this one right here, Twice Adopted, so personal, has helped so many people, will help so many people. Lessons of My Father, the lessons my father taught me, the same thing, very personal as well, but more about obviously your father and his upbringing and the lessons that he passed along to you. Every American needs to read this book. It is fantastic. The wisdom in here, absolutely incredible. And then this right here, also a book every American needs, in the words of Ronald Reagan, right here, The Wit, Wisdom, and Eternal Optimism of America's 40th President. And you can see I have notes here on just some of my favorite quotes, but I love how you set up each section in here and then go into those quotes and then have another section, whether it's on faith or freedom or the Constitution or democracy, and how you set it up with a few paragraphs, and then in you go to those quotes. So, I mean, these books need to be in every American's library. But before I get to some of those specifics, a little bit of background. What was the background for those that aren't familiar with your past? If you could give us a little rundown.
Boy, a little rundown with that. My parents, I was adopted into the family.
Yeah.
My sister Maureen would be 4 years my senior. And she was at Schwab's Pharmacy on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood back in the day. And she went to the pharmacist. She put 97 cents on the pharmacist's desk. And the pharmacist said, "And what do you want, little girl?" And she said, "I want a brother." And her parents, Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman, of course, were with her. And back in the day, people don't understand, if you were an actress and pregnant, you couldn't work because it meant you were having sex. And they certainly didn't want that on screen. So a lot of us became adopted into Hollywood families. And so it ended up, she got her brother. I was adopted into the family. I was 3 days old. Like I tell people, I was born German, and 3 days later, I was Irish. and my sister Marie was so funny because when I came home from the hospital, as she tells the story, she ran upstairs, got her piggy bank out, and couldn't get the cork out of the bottom of it. And she threw it on the floor and broke it, grabbed 97 cents off the floor, ran downstairs and gave it to the people who brought me home from the hospital. And that's how I got into the family. And of course, over the years, she asked for her money back. Over the years, I offered to give her money back and what have you. That was my older sister, Maureen. We lost her to melanoma back at 60 years old, back in 2001, which is really sad. But she was my hero of the family. That's how I got into the family. And parents divorced when I was 3. live with my mom, but I would spend Saturdays with my dad. Take me out to the ranch and ride horses and shoot guns and ground squirrels and swim and all of those things and learn about America. So Saturdays with dad, boarded in school because us Hollywood kids back in the day, we all went to boarding school. It's like one mother called the other mother and said, where are we sending them this year? And so it was student body right, student body left. So I would go to school on Sunday night, come home on Friday or Saturday afternoon, and reintroduce myself to my parents, who I was, just in case they had forgotten during the week, and go on from there. So that was kind of my childhood. I had some rough go of it, which I talk about in my book, Twice Adopted, and others. But ultimately, I made it through the system, but it was very, very tough. Went through a period of time hating myself, hating God, hating my parents, and what have you, blaming them for everything that ever happened to me that was wrong. And ultimately, I found my way back, and here I am.
Yeah, and that rough period, I think, is going to help so many people because so many people struggle with some of those things that you did and went through some of those similar experiences, and you offer this hope and this optimism and this forgiveness, and it's just remarkable. Going back to memories, and I think there were a couple ranches over the years, if I remember correctly, and one of them that stands out, I think, to you during some of those formative years was the ranch in Malibu, and
right.
Some of those memories of being out there, when I was reading about them, I love how there were chores, and chores came first. There was physical labor, but there's also this brain work. But I wanted to ask you about both of those, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about the story of Rebel. And there's something your dad said. He said, there is nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Rebel and some of those other memories of chores and physical labor around the ranch.
Well, everybody remembers, the ranch they saw during the presidency, Rancho del Cielo, but there was two other ranches in the meantime. One in Tarzana, California, was 9 acres, called Yearling Row, and then he bought 360 acres in Malibu, and we raised thoroughbreds. That's what he did, and we would go out there on Saturdays and ride horses and so on. And then, one October, I'm out at the ranch with my dad, and a trailer pulls in with a Palomino horse in it. And I said, what's this? He says, well, there's a little boy who's getting this horse for Christmas. His dad doesn't have a place to keep this horse or train it. And so I volunteered we would keep it here at the ranch. And you're about the same size and height as the little boy getting the horse. And you could ride the horse on Saturdays on a lanyard in the ring and what have you, and kind of get the horse used to a weight like yours. And so when the kid gets the horse, it'll be good. And I'm going like, really? I've got to train this horse now from October, November into December for some other little kid. You've got to be, that's how the horse got its name Rebel, because I really felt like a rebel. Rebel Without a Cause was out, I believe, at the same time. And so every Saturday, be on this horse the end of the day before we would go back home. And Christmas Eve came. My dad called me on the phone and said, I know Rebel's being picked up tomorrow, and I know the attachment you have, and would you like to go out and say goodbye to Rebel? Tears. Of course. And Dad picks me up, and we ride out to the ranch. I'm crying all the way out to the ranch. We pull into the ranch, pull up to the foreman's house. He says, I'm going to go in and see Ray, the foreman, while you say goodbye to Rebel. I go out to the barn, and the barn doors, the stalls are closed, and I open up the top stall door, and here's this freshly washed Palomino with a big ribbon around its neck, said, Merry Christmas, Dad, or Merry Christmas, Michael, love, Dad. I went, oh, and I went, back into tears, and thank you. My horse, I get my horse, and that night at midnight, Santa Claus comes, and so I'm getting up to go over to my sister's room across the hall, and I catch my mom walking out of her room with all the tack.
The new 1911 X from 6 Hour, a balance of classic 1911 engineering and style with modern upgrades, including an ultra-low profile direct mount optic capability designed for the new Romeo X Red Dot Optic. X-Ray 3 day-night sights for extreme sight picture visibility, an adjustable flat blade trigger and custom G10 grip panels from LOK Grips. Designed with a full 1913 rail and stainless steel frame with undercut trigger guard, an extended ambidextrous manual safety and slide stop, chambered in classic 45 ACP. Sig Sauer 1911X. Classic design meets modern innovation.
Introducing the new Jaccar BCM Mod 4 grip. Reduced angle for improved ergonomics and trigger control. New aggressive grip texture to maximize traction. Extended forward tang to close the gap between the trigger guard and pistol grip. High-rise beaver tail style backstrap. Open bottom to minimize weight. Includes mounting hardware for mil-spec lower receivers. Manufactured in the USA from high-quality impact-resistant polymers. Go to BravoCompanyUSA.com and get yours today.
She has the saddle, the bridle, everything. And she looks at me and I look at her. My mom just drops on the floor and says, "Merry Christmas, you put it under the tree." So I got my Rebel, got my horse, and it was that was Dad. It was a perfect Christmas the way he in fact did it. Yeah.
Amazing. I think you named your lab Rebel at some point later down the line.
Yellow Lab.
Yeah.
Golden Yellow Lab was named Rebel also. Yeah.
Amazing. And that physical labor that you did on that on the ranch, and that being so important to your father as he passed these lessons along from you. What did you take from that? And what are some of your memories of digging fence posts and shooting and everything else out there?
Well, actually with the shoot, he shot ground squirrels because he had thoroughbreds and he had jumpers, and he worried about them stepping in a hole you put there by a squirrel. And so we'd go out there and shoot ground squirrels. But really the lesson was, and later on in life, you figure out there's always a lesson with Dad. It's never just this, it's always something else. And so the lesson was patience. Because ground squirrel would pop its head up and then it'd go down. And he'd just sit there and make you wait. You'd sit there and wait for that ground squirrel to pop its head back up again. And he was a crack shot with a 22. And what have you. So he was teaching me patience and also how to be a good shot, but really teaching me patience at that point in time. What you don't realize is that when you're a child, you're very impatient.
Yeah.
And then you look back and go, oh, there was a lesson in that. It was called patience and what have you. And so that was a wonderful lesson. Going out and chopping wood with my dad. In fact, I ended up buying him his first chainsaw for the ranch up in Rancho del Cielo, which was really kind of cool. And just watching him work and then having me. I mean, I think you're probably alluding to the painting the fences. Yeah. During the summer, we had a huge amount of white fences for our horses and what have you. And so I got paid to paint those fences with the foreman's son, Dick, during the summer. And it was like 5 cents a foot, and it was like 15 cents a post, 3 boards, if you will. And so we'd go out there and paint fences to make money during the summer. And we'd paint until we ran out of paint. And it was something. And there's a story. My dad was on ABC television. I set a world record in powerboat racing, catch Canalaska to Seattle. And ABC happened to catch my dad and said, when did you know Michael was going to be okay? He said, I can tell you exactly. He says, I had given Michael the chore of painting the fences out at the ranch in Malibu during the summer to make extra money. And I drove out there one day and I was driving up 3/8 of a mile, entry into that ranch. And as I was driving in, I saw a couple of young boys painting the fence. I didn't know who they were. And I stopped. I said, hi, I'm Ronald Reagan. They said, yes, we know that, Mr. Reagan. And he said, well, who are you? Oh, he said, we're friends of Mike's. Oh, really? Where's Mike? He's at the beach. He's at the beach. Yeah. He says, is he paying you for the fences? And I found out I was paying them 2.5 cents a foot and 7.5 cents a post. He says, that's why Mike was going to be okay. He had put out the work to two other people to paint the fences. He was obligated to paint, and he was making a profit on it. So how could I get upset with that? I found out my son was an entrepreneur. So that's when I knew my son was going to be okay.
I love that. That's fantastic. Similar to the Tom Sawyer story, but slightly different. But that's amazing. Was that the ranch was that close to where they ended up filming MASH years later?
Yes, very much so. 20th Century Fox, in fact, abutted the Reagan Ranch. at Malibu. There was a Schaefer Ranch, the 20th Century Fox Ranch, and the Reagan Ranch. And when my dad was governor, he packaged those three ranches together and formed Malibu Creek State Park because he didn't want somebody to buy it and put houses on it. And so he packaged it as Malibu Creek State Park, the state park, and he took the money from the sale of his ranch and bought Rancho del Cielo, Ranch in the Sky. It was Tip Top Ranch at the time, and that's the ranch everybody knows. But it came from that Malibu ranch that we had for so many years.
Wow. That's incredible. We filmed some of the terminal list out there in the canyons out there, and then also someone's home, a ranch, also let us use it as a double for a Mexico sequence in the first series. So it is such a beautiful and unique place out there. But I can only imagine what it was like back then when you were growing up on that ranch on the weekends, and what a magical place to spend time, and then obviously an incredible person to spend time with.
Oh yeah, it was great. I'd take friends out there, ride horses, hike through all those canyons you're talking about, which were terrific in the 20th Century Fox because we abutted them, and it was a great time to be a kid out there and to hike and ride horses. We had Paramount Ranch was across from us, so I rode horses over there. That whole area was a whole riding area. In fact, as you drive out there, and it's still very open until you get to Calabasas. We have these homes. But God, I remember a 2-lane highway going out there and what have you. We'd ride out on Saturdays if we took the 101, now the 101 freeway. It used to be Ventura Boulevard. We went out that way, would come back on the beach and stop by the pier at the beach because they had fresh Foster's Freeze ice cream. If we went out the beach and came back the valley, they had fresh apple cider at Topanga and Ventura Boulevard. So we'd always get our choice on any given Saturday. My sister and I are our friends who would go with us.
Oh my! I spent a little time out there last year writing some of the last book at a beach house out there that a friend owns. But I can only imagine what it was like on that 2-lane highway back then with those cars, the old cars. I mean, obviously contemporary at the time, but I'm in my mind just imagining what it was like back then. Just incredible. And I wanted to ask you about brain work. Your dad also thought that was so important. The physical labor and the chores were important. That dedication to those chores, but also brain work and improving the mind throughout life. And you talk about that in the books here. And I think many people might not know that he majored in economics. I didn't know that until I read the book here. And then The Road to Serfdom was a book that I have actually upstairs in my library that was very influential on him. But can you talk about that brain work and the importance of learning?
Well, yeah, I talked to a lot of kids at the Young Americans Foundation who bought the ranch in 1998. And I tell them, readers are leaders. And you really think about readers are leaders. If you're not reading, you're not going to ever lead anything because you're not learning anything. And my dad was a ferocious reader. And people say, well, how does he know all these things? Because he read everything. You walked into his home and you saw the library. He actually read those books. They weren't there for photographs. They were there because he read those books and he read them incessantly. And knew them backwards and forwards, and he thought it was so important to use your mind, to use your mind, to use your brain, to be able to get things done. And it is true. And I mean, you're a phenomenal writer, and your readers are leaders, and you lead because you read. I mean, you look at the books you talk about within your podcast, within your X account or whatever account it is today, or your books. I mean, they're knowledgeable. There's lessons in them, but you only know those things tidbits that you give us in these books because you've read so much and learned so much. So you can take us back to that point and say, this point here, this is how we got here was because of this here. And I argue about that all the time with people. I said, you're never going to fix a problem if you don't know where it started. You can't, if you don't go back and say, where did it start? Then how do you fix it? You can't just keep on putting Band-Aids on things time after time after time after time and say, why is nothing happening? Why is it getting fixed? Because you didn't go back to the beginning and say, how did it start? And how can we fix it at that point and move forward? And it really is using your brain to study those things and know those things. And my dad, it was phenomenal. He wrote his own speeches. I watched him. He just write his own speeches and knew him. And like one day he was, gosh, I think it was Newt Gingrich telling me he was at an event to speak. My dad used to keep the 3x5 cards in his left pocket of his suit. And he reached in his pocket, pulled out the cards, and they all fell on the floor. And Newt said, "Oh my God, what is he going to do now?" My dad just scraped them all up and started the speech from whatever card was on top. I mean, it was pretty simple. It was like he knew what he wanted to say, and it didn't matter what card was on top. You got what he wanted to tell you. But I think the great thing about my father was, if you really think about it, he spoke to you in parables. He told you stories, like he told me stories as a child. He told the nation's stories. And if you listen to the stories, like your books, and you really read the books, and we talked about the last time we were at the library, what you put in those books, there's other tidbits in there you can pull out. If you find them, he told you stories. And if you listen really to his stories, you usually got it right.
Well, the great communicator, and the importance of reading for me, it's been foundational to all else, being a lifelong reader and collector of books. I've been collecting books since I was a little kid, reading them, putting them on my shelf. I still have all of them today, and it's really been foundational to everything, to what I did in the SEAL teams, the type of leader and operator I was, then to what I'm doing today. And I approach everything as a student, and started a book club this past summer to try to encourage people to read, so we can read essentially at the same time and then have a book club discussion on a podcast with the author. So I'm doing that to try to encourage people to read and build their libraries and build the foundational elements that come along with being a lifelong learner, a student, a reader. I was going to ask you about the importance of teaching the American work ethic to your children.
Yeah, well, my dad told me one day, he said, his father taught him way back when in Illinois. He said, son, when the government starts paying you not to work, why work? And my dad told me the same thing. The government tells you not to work, why work? And I was always sometimes forced to work, if you will. But, when I was like 8, 10 years old, I was a Beverly Hills brat. I was a Hollywood kid. My mother was the only two people ever born into a family where the father would go on to become president of the United States and the mother go on to become Academy Award winning actress. And nobody else has lived that life. And so I'm a Beverly Hills kid, and all these kids are getting brand new 10-speed bikes and what have you. And I went to my mom and I said, "Mom," I picked it out. I went Hansort Sakuri, 10-speed bike, blue. Schwinn just came out with it. "How about you get it for me, Mom?" And my mom said, "Well, how badly do you want it?" I said, "Mom, I want it more than anything." "Good. Sign here." "Sign what?" "Well, you think I'm going to give you this bike? If you want it that bad, you need to earn it. And how you earn it is you pay for it. So I'm going to loan you the money to buy the bike, and you're going to pay me back." I said, "Well, how the hell am I going to pay you back? I'm 10 years old." So you know what you can do with a bike? I said, "What?" She said, "Deliver papers." So I ended up selling papers in front of Good Shepherd Church on Sunday mornings. And I would split the profits with my mom. I signed the note to pay back my mom. And I said to my mom, "Why in the world do you make me do this when all my friends are getting bikes given to them by their parents?" She said, "Because I build men, I don't build boys. I don't want you to be a 40-year-old child.
Wow.
I want you to be a 40-year-old man." And it was interesting because when I turned 40, I actually called her on the phone. I said, "Mom, I'm 40. I'm ready now. You give me some money." She said, "Go back to work." But again, but that was a lesson she in fact taught me, which was a great lesson from her. And it didn't stop there. She continued it, where I started when I did radio. And I was driving to San Diego and back every day to get a national radio show off the ground back in early 1990, 91. I'd just been replaced by some guy named Rush Limbaugh on a local show. I said, "Oh, that sucks." So I said, "Let me start a national show, do it to others before they do it to you again." And I had no money. I had 2 kids. Colleen was doing travel. She's a travel agent. She owns a travel business. And I called my mom. I said, "Mom, I need some help. I'm not making any money. We're getting this off the ground. Can you help me out?" She said, "Yes, I can." I said, "Thank God. What can you do?" She said, "I can tell you this, Michael. Shut up and keep driving." She hung up on me. I called her back. I said, "What are you doing hanging up on me?" She said, "Did somebody die and say you didn't have to pay your dues?" No. Well, if you're a success, you're going to give me the credit? You shouldn't. If you're a success, you take the credit. So shut up and keep driving. And she hung up on me again. And that radio show lasted from 1991 till I walked away in 2009.
Wow.
Because my mom was like that. When I dropped out of college, my parents told me, while you were in college, we were taking care of you. You dropped out, get a job. So when my dad became governor, I was working on a trucking dock in LA, loading oil well freight from 5 at night to 1:30 in the morning. I was I was filling out a 40-foot long trailer and a 20-foot backhaul with nothing but rock bits and piping and all that kind of stuff. And I did that when my dad became governor. That's where I was.
Wow. There's something about having that paper route when you're a kid. And I had one too. I was with a little, I don't even think it was a BMX bike, but a BMX type bike. So there's no gears on it. We lived in a place that was had a lot of hills. So I hadn't thought about that in years till you just brought it up right now. There's something about that, about doing that, tossing those papers out, and then went in the bush and having to stop, go back, dig for it, put it there in the driveway or by the front door or whatever out, keep going, and make almost nothing. But you're bringing people the news. I mean, there was something about that. And I hadn't thought about that in years. Thank you for that memory. I'm gonna ask, my mom's about to come out for Thanksgiving. I'm gonna ask her about that when she gets out here. Speaking of Hollywood, what are some memories of your dad's days in Hollywood and your mom's days in Hollywood? I think he got an extra $25 a day for movies that had horses in them, because actors that could ride horses were more valuable, and so they got $25 extra a day. What are some of your memories of Hollywood back then?
Actually, he got $25 more a day if he brought his own horse.
Oh, own horse! You got to bring your own. Wow. Okay.
He
Well, that
brought
makes
his own
sense.
horse. He brought so Baby, big black horse, and a couple of movies he did, westerns. He did was his horse. So an extra $25 a day, and that was a lot of money, back in the 40s and 50s and what have you. He was president of the Screen Actors Guild and so on. In fact, it's interesting because the Screen Actors Guild, the residuals that they get today started with my dad. He's the one with president of the Screen Actors Guild that provides residuals to actors and healthcare. They didn't have healthcare or residuals until my dad became president of the Screen Actors Guild.
Wow.
Last time they were on strike, where you had the writers and the actors on strike together, they pulled my dad out of retirement in 1960 to settle that strike. So he's very strong. And that's why he was a Democrat. He was in the unions and what have you. But it's kind of neat seeing your parents on TV. Mom, Academy Award winning actress. She got for Johnny Belinda, The Yearling, nominated a few times for that. She got 3 or 4 Golden Globes. Kind of cool having your parents in that position. It really is. And the good side and the bad side is, as you go into life, people don't think you ever had to work. They think your parents gave you everything. Like when I did radio, the only reason you got a radio show is because your dad was president of the United States or governor of California or what have you. And you sit there and say, it lasted 29 years. So the hard thing is to get credit for the things you're accomplishing, because they keep on spinning them over because your parents are so damn iconic, as both my parents are and were. But Mom, I went to a couple of premieres with her. Interesting enough, went to the premiere of the movie Reagan, was at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. I was with Dennis Quaid. And I walked Dennis Quaid out because my mom has handprints and footprints at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. So we got a picture taken by my mom's, square there with her handprints and footprints at Chinese Theater. So it's kind of cool to have your parents in that position. And thank God they were the Midwestern couple that believed in work ethic. And it wasn't for them and my wife, Colleen, I would be sitting here in a tent downtown LA it'd be a nice tent, but I'd be in a tent downtown LA with a cup.
Yeah. And there's a few other, I guess you had a little bit of experience in Hollywood yourself. Wasn't there a guest appearance or something on Falcon Crest I wanted to ask you about?
Oh yeah. I came home for lunch. I was in the boat business. I was selling boats, Sea Ray boats for years. And I came home for lunch and the phone rang, and unfortunately I picked it up. And I mean, a lot of people have had that happen. That was my mom. So what are you doing? I said, "I'm having lunch." "Do you have a suit?" I said, "Yeah, I own a suit." "Well, put it on. I need a concierge." I said, "You need a what?" "I need a concierge. I'm opening up a spa." "You're what?" "Falcon Crest. You know the television shows Falcon Crest?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, I'm opening up a spa and I need a concierge. Put a suit on, get over here." So I did like 6 Falcon Crest with my mother. I'm a terrible actor, but I did it for my mom, which is great working with my mom. And when my dad was president, so my dad's president and my mother had the number one television show was Falcon Crest on television. So I had like, hello. Uh, but a story about my mom back, God, she was so frugal and so wonderful. And I politically am because of my dad, but I am the way I am because of my mother and my wife. It's like, I mean, it's unbelievable. But my mom back in 1950, 51 got $1 million signing bonus to do a television series called Jane Wyman's Fireside Theater. And she put it into a self-liquidating annuity. I said, "Why'd you do that?" She said, "Because I'm going to get to the point of being too old for one part, too young for another part. I don't want to just do a show because I have to eat. I want to be able to choose and what I want to do." And so she put it into self-liquidated annuity, and she did a couple of shows, but sure enough, 1980, Falcon Crest comes along, bang, and she gets that show that she wanted and was there for 9 years. But when she passed in 2007, that self-liquidated annuity was still cutting her a check every January, boom, boom, every year. She never had to worry because she did what so many actors and actresses and football players and talented people don't do. They spend all the money. She didn't spend it. She put it away for the future because she knew the future. She was not going to be able to do all the things she was doing when she was younger. A lot of people can learn from the way she really saved money and took care of her life later on in life.
Oh yeah, a lot of artists fall into that trap, in that they have something that hits. They get a lot of money, then they spend it, and then they are essentially forced to take creative projects, but projects they wouldn't have taken otherwise. And so really having that financial freedom and being smart with that money earlier on allows you then to make creative choices later in life that aren't based on the financials, or aren't based on the necessity of having to do them because of the financial piece. You get to choose those creative projects, and
great lesson.
It really is. I wanted to ask you about a story after your dad enters politics, about the Justin Dart story about the bag of cash. Where he throws that bag of cash back at that guy who tries to buy some influence.
I forget. Yeah, that's an old story too.
That's an older one.
Which happens in every administration, by the way. If you haven't noticed, it happens in every administration. It's what you do with it. Unfortunately, there's too many people who take the cash. And somebody, Justin Dart, who was one of the original backers of my dad. He was one of the original group that put together the money. Justin Dart, Holmes Tuttle, and others. They were the group that funded my dad's campaign into the president's or governorship of California. And I forget somewhat of the story, but it was somebody again wanting to have favor, and Justin Dart just threw the money, just threw it back at him, just get out of here. But that's the way it was back then with the people my dad had around him. They were just such honorable people he had around him, and the governorship into the presidency. A lot of people came into the presidency with him. He just had those kind of people around him all the time that weren't going to. You never really read anything about any of the people around him that were accepting things. The watch thing in the safe, which is a stupid thing, but again, you never found people with their hand out trying to live off of Ronald Reagan, live off of their position, and you couldn't buy them because they could actually buy you. If you really think, Rexall Pharmacies, pretty good company. And again, so it really kind of understood that. But it's interesting, that group of people, my dad, I tell a story when I take people out to the library. I don't know if they ever told you this story at the library, but my dad almost didn't run for governor because he was going to have to fly. And my dad had not flown from the end of the Second World War until he decided to run for governor in 1965. Because he believed God gave you so many air miles, and he used them all up during the Second World War, doing, doing things for the military, doing 300 films for the military, training films for the military back during the war. And so he thought he used them all up. And so everywhere he went, he took a car, had a driver, took a train, took a bus, never flew. And it was his brother Moon Reagan, Neil Reagan, who put together the kitchen cabinet, Justin Dart being one of them, to fund him running for governor. And finally, he said to my dad, and you'll see it in the movie Reagan. They get together and say, "Yeah, if you want to be governor, you're going to have to. There's a meeting." And my dad figured out the only way he's going to get there is to fly. And nobody knew, but he ended up flying for the first time since 1945, the end of the war, taking that flight to have a meeting with what became the kitchen cabinet, and the rest is history. And he ends up flying more air miles in Air Force One than any president prior to him or since him. End up loving flying. The last time people remember him is when we were flying my dad back and forth across country when he passed. And so it's really kind of interesting how he went from not flying since the end of the Second War to being a president who was known for flying everywhere. And the flights he would take were all called freedom flights.
Wow, that's amazing. And for people who haven't visited the Reagan Library, I highly recommend you go and take the kids there. It's an absolutely incredible facility. And what's there? Air Force One. And when you walk on, I hadn't gone because the last time things were too busy and the line was too long, and this time we structured things a little bit differently, and so I got to go and walk through Air Force One that they have there, and with today in mind, maybe if you walk through it in like say 1985 or something, you would have a different it would feel different, I guess. But when you're walking through it today, it's pretty rustic. It's pretty old. Yeah. I mean, it's not luxurious in any. It's almost like a 1970s, maybe 1980s motorhome on the inside, and that was what I felt like. I'm like, this is kind of like a motorhome, and not a new motorhome, one from the 70s or 80s. And that's what you feel like when you walk through that thing. It's incredible.
Yeah, do you like that Royal typewriter?
Oh yeah. It's what they had. The technology is just you think 1985, you kind of think it's fairly modern, especially if you grew up in the 80s. But now looking back and you see it, and you see the technology that the president of the United States is using at the time, and you're like, wow, this is. I'm a little older than I think that I am, or something along those lines. It's amazing.
But from my standpoint, back in the day, I thought this was really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I got on the new one. I went, well, maybe it's not that cool. But the last time I was on that flying was Good Friday, 1988, with my dad flying back from Washington, D.C. to Point Mugu for Easter weekend. He would go up to the ranch, and I'd go home to see Colleen and the kids and what have you. And I remember we were sitting there in his cabin, and he counted out the number 9 on his fingers. And I said, what's important about number 9? What's that significance? He said, 9 more months, I'll no longer be president. I said, why are you thinking of that? He said, Michael, ever since I looked out the rear window of my limousine on March 30th, 1981, and saw people laying in their own blood with bullets that were meant for me, I haven't gone to church on a regular basis for fear of putting people in harm's way. And so I'm looking forward to no longer being president of the United States. So I once again start going to church each and every Sunday and visit with my Lord and Savior. Wow. And he did. He never missed church after that until Alzheimer's kicked in, and then the minister would come minister to him, at the house. But that's what was on his mind 9 months before he would leave the presidency. And I was lucky enough to be there with him and what have you. That's why they refer to me as the prequel at the library.
Wow. And it's such an amazing spot. Now, I haven't been up to the ranch yet. I mean, I really want to get up there. I want to see where they put the Secret Service snipers. I'd love to go there with you. Cool. We got to make that happen, and that would be great. Yeah, that would be amazing to go and see all that. But I've seen the photos, and that's fairly rustic as well. I think people, when they hear ranch, they think something extravagant these days. When you hear someone has a ranch in or anywhere in California, in this case, and it's very rustic. It's very, very humble. They live very
It's exactly the way it was the last day Dad was there, because he didn't know he wasn't going back. So the house is exactly what it was, soap in the soap dish, all of that. And when I tell people are going to go visit, and I'll tell you when I visit, you visit up there and I'm with you, Cameron will be there, is the fact that whatever your thoughts are about my dad, when you walk in the front door of that house, you'll say to yourself, I was right. Everything I thought about him, I was absolutely 100% right. He was that guy. Because you walk in there, you don't see pictures of famous people. You see horses. See pictures of horses. You see jackalopes. You have to explain jackalopes to people as you take them through there. And it's, I remember he told it when the Secret Service saw the jackalope photo in the bar area, they said, what are those? My dad looked at, well, they're jackalopes. They said, what are jackalopes? You know, they got the tasseled shoes going, right? And he said, oh, the jackalopes, oh, they're wild out here. They live in the brush. They come out at night and they'll hit you about thigh high with those antlers if you don't protect yourself. So really watch out. And they're attracted to light. And so that first couple of nights, the Secret Service were guarding the ranch. Secret Service out there, they had wrapped cardboard around their legs, around their thighs, and duct taped it around their thighs to protect their thighs from the jackalopes that may come out and get them during the night while they're protecting the ranch. Funnier than that.
You gotta watch out for those jackalopes. They'll get you. They'll get you every time. Also in the book, this one here, we talk about the importance of trust, and I thought that was something that. When I got back from my last deployment, someone asked me to write up something on leadership, and I hadn't really thought about leadership. I'd been in leadership positions, I'd been doing the job, but in Iraq and Afghanistan, I really didn't have time to think about the principles of leadership, and I didn't go through at a time when they actually taught leadership, and so it was all baptism by fire. And when I sat down finally after that last deployment and started putting some thoughts down on paper, the thing that rose to the top was trust.
Trust.
The most important piece of leadership, at least in my experience, looking back on it, was trust, both above and below you in the chain of command. And to see that here in the book just brought back those memories for me as well from the SEAL teams and that trust. And even though I wasn't framing it in those terms at the time, but building that with the guys that you're taking downrange, every opportunity is a chance to build that trust and continue building that trust. And then same thing with senior level leadership. You have to prove to them that that they can let you alone to do the job, and you're not the problem child, the problem platoon, the problem leader, because that allows you freedom of maneuver on the battlefield and in training. And so building that trust up and down the chain is so important. And to read that it was important to Ronald Reagan as well was really cool to read.
It's absolutely right. And that's why he was able to accomplish what he accomplished. You could take him his word. If he told you something, you could take it to the bank. Like, when he told the air traffic controllers, you go on strike, you're fired. They went on strike, they got fired. I mean, but he also understood messaging. That he knew that message was going to stay right what it was supposed to be to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So if he told the world something, you could take that to the bank. You could trust him on that each and every time. And so he was ultimately able to put things together with Pope John Paul, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, Helmut Kohl, Margaret Thatcher, and ultimately Mikhail Gorbachev, because his word was his bond. And you could trust him. When he told you something, he would live by it. Same thing as a child. If he told us something, you knew it was going to happen. And that's so important today. And I think we've lost that trust in government. We've lost that trust in so many areas of our lives. And that's what's unfortunate, that we've lost that trust. And we have to gain that trust back. The military has to gain that trust back to leadership. What's the leadership going to do? Are you going to have my back? You're not going to have my back? What's the issue here? It really is that the trust. The military does a better job when you have their back and they can trust leadership, whoever it might be. And like you and I've talked, Lieutenant Colonel David Hackworth, great leader, and his crew trusted him, when he was out there and he had them. And there are people like that, and you've got to, have that. You got to have the leaders that you trust. And the country trusted Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And that's why he got reelected in 1985 for a second term. But trust. And there's so many people say, I disagree with your father on so many issues, but I trusted him. That's such a key thing people used to say to me. It's absolutely true. Didn't agree with him, but I trusted him. And boy, oh boy, that's such a short, simple word that means so much.
Yeah, it sure is. I want to take you back in time a little bit, and was going to ask you about a story where the media was protecting JFK. He was going in and out of, I guess they had photos of him going out visiting different women, that sort of a thing. And I guess the Republican Party or the Republicans for Democrats for Nixon or someone had these photos, and they could have helped Nixon. And your dad said no. He's not running for husband of the year. He's running for president. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that in particular, and then his relationship with Nixon.
Well, my sister Maureen and I and Nancy were having dinner at the house, and Dad was talking Nixon Kennedy, and Dad let us know that about the photographs they had of Kennedy in and out of hotel rooms with other women other than his wife. And Maureen and I said, back in younger, he said, hey, so you're going to put, the Republican Party had the photos. Said, is the Republican Party going to put them out there to help Nixon? And my dad said, no, and they shouldn't. This isn't about, husband of the year. This is about the presidency of the United States of America. That's what it's all about. And that's what it should be. We shouldn't get into the personal lives of people like that. This is are you qualified to be president of the United States? If you're going to kick people out because they're unfaithful to their spouse, you're going to find a very small group of people qualified to be president of the United States of America if you're going to start going that deep. And he said, no, and it'd be wrong to do it. And I brought that up in the Nixon Library when I was selling my book years ago. And I brought up, and the curator came up to me and said, you know about those photos? I said, yeah, I know about those photos. He said, you're the only person that's ever mentioned those photos. I said, you have these photos here? Oh, yeah, we've got the photos here. I said, I'm just wondering. But again, that was who he was. He didn't make politics personal. And now it's gotten personal. And that's hurtful to everybody on that level, if you will. My dad was never that. In the movie Reagan, when my dad is depicted being shot by Dennis Quaid, he's in the hospital room, and this actually happened. Nothing in the movie is false; it's all real stuff. Probably one of the seminal moments I pulled out of there was the fact when he woke up in the hospital bed, Tip O'Neill was sitting in a chair with his rosary.
Wow.
Praying for my father. Wow. And he ended up praying with my father. And that's a real story. That actually happened. Wow. And you're going, would that happen today? Would that happen? The world we live in today, would that happen? And unfortunately, I think not. I don't think it would happen. But here's two people disagree politically, figured it out, and here was Tip O'Neill, the Catholic, Ronald Reagan, the Protestant, and here was Tip O'Neill with a rosary in his hand praying for my father. And I tell people, go see that movie. Look at that moment. Think about that moment and think where we are today and where we were and how do we get back there.
Wow. For those watching or listening, that would be like today, Nancy Pelosi sitting in a hospital room with President Trump and praying for him after something happened to him. And you don't really see that happening today, unfortunately. I think there's some black and white photos out there that I've seen of your father. I think he's in a tuxedo at the time with Nancy, and then Tip O'Neill and his wife either out to dinner or at an opera outside of the political realm, out there together having dinner together with their spouses.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. When he became president after the shooting, of course, he invited Tip O'Neill was the first person he invited to the White House, him and his wife. And Tip O'Neill would go back to his staff next couple of days and say, I'm going to carry that legislation the president has on lowering taxes. His staff looked at him and said, what? You disagree with that? Why would you do that? If you put it on the floor, it'll pass because back then, Bull Weevil, now Blue Dog Democrats, there's enough of them on it with us that would vote for him and it would pass. What did the president promise you at dinner the other night? What did he say? So he never talked about taxes all night long. He never talked about taxes. Then what in the hell did he talk about? Well, he talked about the greatness of America, the goodness of all of her people, and how the two of us working together can make it better for all Americans. Before I knew it, I'm having a glass of wine with the president. We're telling Irish stories. And today I'm going to carry the legislation to the floor of the House of Representatives. But he did say one thing as I was leaving. He said, anyone in our group that supports the legislation. He promises not to campaign against it in the next election, with a wink and a nod. I mean, Dad disarmed you with his affability, his wink and a nod. He was never angry, really angry. He was just that was him. And whether it was with Maureen and I and Ron and Patty or whatever. And another story, I think, to take it back to today. I tell people, I say, he had 2 children in his family, Nancy's children, who didn't vote in the first election. Patty was a member of the Peace and Freedom Party, and Ron, atheist, I don't think voted at all. Patty led a march on Washington while her father was president of the United States. He invited her into the Oval Office to say, what's the gripe, and what have you. Neither one of them voted for him in 1984-85 election. But, at Thanksgiving dinner, when we all sat down for Thanksgiving dinner, they were at the table. They were at the table. So you have so many people talk about my father, learning from my father, but really learn from my father. He had 2 children, one an atheist, Ron, Patty. Neither one voted for him. One led a march on Washington, D.C., and yet at Thanksgiving dinner, Patty and Ron were at the table having Thanksgiving dinner with us. People can learn a lot from that, because today, as you saw last Thanksgiving and what have you, you have people being, blocked from the table because they may disagree on who you voted for, who you didn't vote for. Learn from Ronald Reagan. You're not going to change the world or change society if you don't bring people in. You can't kick people out and think, God, what's wrong?
Wow, I love that story. And I wanted to read something here. So it's in Lessons My Father Taught Me, and this is from the first day. This is the first inaugural address, and this is your dad. And he says, "We are too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We are not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. So with all the creative energy at our command, let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams."
You read that and I almost go to tears, because I
know.
Yeah, as I said, Dad talked to us in parables, and I write that story, or quote my dad, or you can listen today, and you listen to my dad's speeches or you read those, you will laugh in the same spot. If it's a humorous story, you will cry in the same spot that you cried in back then. I was telling some of the people running for president this last year, and I said, what's the difference between us and your dad? I said, with my dad, you felt his stories, you felt his speeches. With all of you, you just hear them. And if I just hear you, I forget it. But if I feel you, I'll never forget it. I suggest going back and listening to more Reagan stories or what have you. But again, optimism. He was the Boy Scout in the family. I mean, we felt if he didn't make president in 1980, we were going to run him for an Eagle badge for the Boy Scouts, because he was such a Boy Scout, and that's how he believed. He didn't have to make this stuff up. It was in his soul, the what he believed. And when you read that, you really hear it and hear what he's saying. And optimistic. That's why he was elected with overwhelming numbers in the day, because he made people believe. He made people feel good, and he delivered on those things, if you will. And it's that speech, along with the tear down the wall speech, the point to Hawk speech. Oh my God. I would suggest people go back and just listen or read these speeches that he in fact gave. And I start to tear up when you're reading that back to me. My gosh. And that was back in 1980s, and, wrote about it in the book. And I still tear up when I hear it, because it makes you feel good, makes you feel positive that there is a future, and a great future for this great country of ours, if we just figure it out.
Yeah. And what I didn't know until I read this book, the first order of business, there were some things that happened first personally after the inauguration, but the first order of business had to do with terrorism. And I found that really interesting. Meeting with the heads of the FBI, Secret Service, CIA, and State Department, Department of Defense, and others. Day one, first order of business is terrorism. And here on, I'm going to read this from your book here because it's something that I found to be quite powerful over the years, and that's the power of forgiveness. And right here, there were some few things, of course, many terrorist events that took place on your father's watch. But one of the biggest one is this one. And you write, it took place at dawn on Sunday, October 23rd, 1983. A truck loaded with the equivalent of 21,000 pounds of TNT, driven by a suicide bomber, plowed into a U.S. Marine compound outside of Beirut, Lebanon. The bomb detonated, producing the largest non-nuclear blast since World War II. The explosion lifted the building off its foundation and collapsed it to a pile of smoking rubble. The attack killed 220 Marines and 21 other U.S. servicemen. It was the heaviest one-day death toll suffered by the Marines since the Battle of Iwo Jima. My father called it the saddest day of his presidency, and perhaps of his life. I'll never forget the expression on his face as he and Nancy passed by the rows of flag-draped coffins at Dover Air Force Base. My father sent those Marines, sailors, and soldiers to Beirut, and they had died there. And I know that one of the hardest things my father ever had to do was forgive himself for those 241 deaths. I think many of us find it much easier to forgive others than to forgive ourselves. I know that Dad internalized the blame for that loss of life. So powerful.
Oh yeah, and you and I talked a bit, but your book out about that day in Beirut, which brought you to the library here a couple of weeks ago, is it was a hell of a day for my dad. It was, as I told you, he really took it to the grave. But my dad, taught me forgiveness because I had to learn to forgive two things that happened to me in my life. And people say, what's the biggest lesson I learned from my dad? I learned a lot of lessons, but forgiveness was the best one. Because if you don't learn to forgive, you'll never move forward again. You always use that moment as a crutch for failure, and you need to learn to forgive. And you have to learn to forgive yourself. And I had to learn that too. When we started this, things happened to me as a child. Those of you who don't know, I was sexually molested as a child for 1 year of my life. There were naked photos taken of me by a pedophile who had me develop the photo, put his hand on my shoulder, said, "Wouldn't your mother like to have a copy of this?" And scared the hell out of me. I thought my life was really over. And I had to learn to forgive myself because the damage from that point on, the damage I did to other people in my life based on that moment, the way I treated my mother, the way I treated my father, the way I treated people around me. Because my fear was if you found out what I know about me, you wouldn't be my friend. You'd walk away. So my choice was to chase you away first before you had a chance to know who I was. I thought I was evil and what have you. And the twice adopted is the fact, I ran away from God when I was 8, 9 years old, but I had to run back to God to find myself again. But I had learned to forgive myself for the damage I did to others in my life based on the damage that was done to me as a child. And I really learned that from Dad because, again, forgiveness. When he was shot by, March 30th, 1981, his first reaction was what? To forgive John Hinckley. The Secret Service wouldn't allow him to go back and actually see him and forgive John Hinckley. But he forgave John Hinckley and got on with his life. And I tell people when I go out and speak, Pope John Paul, who was shot a few months later, both the president and the Pope both forgave those who tried to kill them. And I say to people when I talk to Christian organizations, I said, how many here can recite the Lord's Prayer? And all these hands go up. I said, well, how many of you live it? And they all look at me. I said, I know 2 people who lived it, John Paul and Ronald Reagan, because they forgave those who tried to kill them and got on with their life and formed a bond and a relationship, ended up bringing peace to Poland and wrapping around and bringing down the Berlin Wall and bringing freedom to a part of the world. But I don't think it would have happened had they not both forgiven those who tried to kill them first, because it put them on a path of a relationship that ultimately did all these things. And they had a start point, and thank God that they survived the assassin's bullets. But forgiveness is such a big thing. And you look at the things that you can do and create, and the great things you can create if you learn to forgive first.
Yeah. And this is a two-parter. What do you remember about that day that your father was shot? And then when did you learn to forgive John Hinckley Jr.? Did you forgive him as your father did, or did it take a period of time? Because he was released, as people may know, a number of years ago, and you came out publicly and forgave him.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely. I think my dad forgave him. I'm going to sit there and say I'm not going to forgive him. My dad forgave him. I mean, if the guy who got shot forgives him, then I got to sit there and say, okay, I get it, I understand it, and what have you. But that day was, I was at my office. Secret Service agent walked into my office, and the agent in charge of my detail, Mike Ludi, and said, "There's been a shooting back in Washington, assassination attempt, but your dad's okay." And they closed the door. I said, such warmth. And
Wow.
the people I was having to meet with said, I said, don't ask. So I got on the phone and I called back the White House. I said, give me Nancy. Nancy just left. I went back out. I said to Mike Lewis, Mike, my dad's been shot. No, they said he hasn't been shot. I said, I just called the White House and Nancy just left the White House. She would be at the White House waiting for my dad to arrive. It means he's not arriving at the White House. He's going somewhere else. I would guess the hospital. Is let me check. And of course, it was sent over the hospital. But, they would send out a C-130. What a nice aircraft that is. Sitting in a strap seat.
Oh, yeah.
Secret Service said to us, because our family was on, said, you're going to get the airport, they're going to give you a box lunch, earplugs, and a blanket.
That's it. It hasn't changed.
And I said, really? I said, yeah. I said, yeah. I thought he was BSing me. I got to the airport. I got a box lunch, earplugs, and a blanket. I said, oh my God. And so we got there late at night, White House, and we'd go see my dad 10 o'clock the next morning. My wife and I would go. Cameron stayed back with friends. And I walked into the room. My dad looks at me and says, good morning. He said, yesterday I was shot. I said, Dad, the world knows you were shot yesterday. This is not a newsflash. He said, well, you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit. I said, excuse me? He said, I was wearing a brand new suit yesterday. I just picked it up the day before. And the last time I saw that suit, it was in the corner of a hospital room. They actually cut that suit off to me. It was in shreds in the corner of the hospital room. And you've seen the suit gone to the library. And he said, that's why I tell you, if you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit. And I said, okay. He says, that young man who shot me, Hinckley. I said, yes, John Hinckley. He says, do you think his parents have any money? I said, excuse me? He says, well, they live in Denver. I said, yeah, they live in Denver and they're in the oil business. Of course, Dad, they probably have money. Do you think they'd ever buy me a new suit? This is what he says 6 hours after he's off the table from almost dying. This is the conversation I'm having with my dad that morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, in the hospital room. He put people at ease. Honey, I forgot to duck. I hope you're all Republicans here. The things he would say, because he understood who he was. And how many people don't understand who they are? They really don't know who they are. Dad knew exactly who he was. And he understood, too, that people in his presence would become nervous, and what have you. And so he used humor to kind of put people at ease. Mm-hmm. And with that, putting them at ease, he could get in the conversation and they could have conversations together and what have you. And he understood this and he used it in such a great way.
Amazing. And a few more before I have to let you go here. Your memories of some of those people who, if you grew up in the 80s, you remember the names and you remember those faces and you remember them being around your father. Some of the memories of some of those guys, like George Bush, Vice President, Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, interesting with the shooting.
I'm in control here. Yeah,
that one. Yeah, very interesting. And then George Schultz and some of these, Casper Weinberger, Frank Carlucci, William Smith, Edward Meese, all these guys that were on the news, Donald Regan, James Baker, Bud McFarland. When you think back about those guys during that time frame, what comes to mind? What memories do you have of those guys?
Every one of them qualified to be president of the United States.
Wow.
Every single one of them. I think that's important as we're dealing with today in the world that we live in. Every one of them qualified to be president of the United States. He put people around him, whether George Schultz or any one of these people. We're unbelievable people. I mean, just such a great group. Bill Clark, Judge Bill Clark. Great book written on him, Judge Bill Clark. I used to think of him as the conscience of Ronald Reagan. A lot of people worked for Ronald Reagan. Bill Clark was the conscience of Ronald Reagan. My dad always knew he'd go to Bill Clark. Okay, I'm getting all this information from these people. Hey, Bill, what do you think? And Ed Meese and what have you. I'll tell you one quick story. Ed Meese, this is a visit with my dad. He's in town. Two stories. First of all, he's in town after the presidency, and I'm having lunch with him in Beverly Hills at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. And we get done with lunch, and I said, how's it going? Early on in the presidency. And he said, Michael, he said, let me tell you what I miss. I said, what's that, Dad? He says, you're going to get up now, say goodbye. You're going to walk out that door. You're going to walk across the hall. You're going to get on the elevator. You're going to go down the first floor, walk out the doors to Wilshire Boulevard, and walk down Wilshire Boulevard. I can't do that anymore. I can't any longer get up and walk out that door and go down to Wilshire Boulevard and walk down Wilshire Boulevard. Not possible to do any longer. My privacy's gone. That's why the ranch was so important to my dad. That's where he had that privacy. I tell people there'd be no library if there was no ranch. The ranch needed to be there to get the library, to get the presidency. And I remember I was telling a story at an event one time, and I was saying to people, I said, I was with my dad having dinner, Colleen and I were, and Century Plaza Hotel. And afterwards, we're sitting there having a cup of coffee, and Ed Meese calls 3 floors down. And my dad answered the phone, and Ed says, Mr. President, we're doing war games in the Gulf of Sidra. My dad said, well, yes, I know that. And I authorized it after it was taken away by the previous administration, Carter. He says, well, I have the admiral on the phone from the aircraft carrier there, and we're doing these war games, and Gaddafi's sending people out from, Libya and locking onto our boys. And there's a fear that, in fact, a Libyan plane may fire upon one of our boys. And the admiral wants to know, what should we do if we're fired upon? And my dad said, fire back. And then dead silence for a moment, and Ed comes back to him and says, well, the admiral wants to know if we're fired upon and they turn and run, what should they do? My dad said, you chase them. And then dead silence, and you'll love this. And Ed goes back and says, Mr. President, what happens if they're fired upon and they turn and run back into their own airspace? My dad says, if they're fired upon, you chase them all the way back to their hangars if necessary, and you will shoot them down. Wow. Yes, Mr. President. Good night, Mr. President. Good night, Ed. Dad and Nancy go to bed, Colleen and I leave, and you'll remember the story. Next morning, 2 Russian MiGs in the ground outside of Tripoli. That's the backstory to that story.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. I mean, so many stories. And really quick before I let you go, memories of Margaret Thatcher and your father.
Margaret Thatcher, I did a couple of events with her where I emceed a couple of events with her. We got to be friends that way. But I'll never forget the day after we buried my dad at the library. We happened to be having breakfast, same hotel, Bel Air Hotel. We stayed the night there in Bel Air. And she came down for breakfast, and I said hello to her, and she said, oh, Michael, think what we could have accomplished had your dad been elected in 1976. I said, Lady Thatcher, I appreciate that. Had he been elected in 1976, the Cold War would still be going on. The Berlin Wall would still be up, and we'd be nowhere. He said, "Why would you say that?" I said, "Lady Thatcher, where were you in 1976? Where was Lech Walesa? Where was Václav Havel? Where was Helmut Kohl? Where was Pope John Paul? Ultimately, where was Mikhail Gorbachev? None of you were in place in 1976. If Dad gets elected and reelected for 1980, we reelected. Mikhail Gorbachev doesn't come into play till 1985. So all these things would still be going on." I said, "But I believe God chooses his moments, chooses his people, and chooses his time. In 1980, Lady Thatcher, where were you? Where was Lech Walesa? Where was Václav Havel? Where was Helmut Kohl? And where was Mikhail Gorbachev? All of you came into place, Pope John Paul, all of you came into place between 1980s and 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev came. And the cadre of people were there. And the thing was that the rest of the world, and you know this from the position you've been in all your life, the world looks at the United States of America for leadership. And you all were looking for leadership in Washington, D.C., and we didn't have that leadership at the time. And when my dad comes in 1981, the leadership was there. But the great thing about my dad was the fact the greatest signage he has on his desk, no telling what a man can do, what he can accomplish if he doesn't worry who gets the credit. Today, too many people are trying to take credit and getting nothing done instead of sharing the credit and all of a sudden having these people around them who are willing to move forward and march with them forward. Back to your issue of trust.
Yeah. And you talk about that in here, lessons my father taught me about that credit and success. The relationship with Gorbachev also, can you tell me a little bit about that? And do you know if your father was ever considered for the Nobel Peace Prize? Because he certainly should have been. But of course, they would never do that. But which is interesting considering the history of the Nobel. But anyway, that's another story. People can look that up. But do you know if he was ever the relationship with Gorbachev, and then was he ever considered for the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, his name might have been thrown out there, but it's like his name thrown out for Academy Award in Hollywood. Neither one's going to ever happen with Ronald Reagan. But Mikhail Gorbachev, we actually became somewhat friends. I did a couple of events with Mikhail Gorbachev and his daughter, Colleen, and I, in a few events. And of course, we were at the ranch with him when he wore his hat backwards, and nobody would tell him all day long. His hat was on backwards because he was Mikhail Gorbachev and what have you. Had a picture with him and my kids at the library in front of the Berlin Wall piece that's there. But it's interesting. We go back and it's in the movie at the end of the movie. 1976 when my dad lost. I asked my dad, why do you even want to become president of the United States? He said, "Michael, for so long I've watched American presidents sit down with secretary generals of the Soviet Union. And every time we sit down with them, they always ask us to give up something and get along with them." He said, "I wanted to win the nomination and the presidency, so I could be the first president to sit down with the Secretary General of the Soviet Union. And I was going to choose the table, the chairs, and the place because that's how you do things at that level. And as he was telling me what it was I was going to have to give up to get along with them, I wanted to get up from my side of the table, walk around to his side, lean over and whisper in his ear, 'Nyet.' I want to be the first president to say 'Nyet' to a Secretary General of the Soviet Union. Now take that to Reykjavik. Reykjavik, my dad's there to sign the START agreement. Mikhail Gorbachev says, 'I'll only sign it if you give up Star Wars or SDI.' And we've all seen the photo of my dad walking away. And in the movie you'll see him saying 'Nyet' from my story from 1976. A lot of stories I tell end up in the movie because I was like the only one in the building at that time. And that my dad said 'Nyet.' And interestingly enough, a year later, Mikhail Gorbachev goes to Washington, D.C. and signs that agreement that he wouldn't sign in Reykjavik a year earlier. So it was Mikhail Gorbachev and my dad. They built a relationship. I would suggest people go, the movie streams online. It's in Blu-ray. See the movie. It really depicts, it's a great biopic, if you will. And it's It's worth every minute of it. You'll see at the end, Mikhail Gorbachev telling my dad that his grandmother, my story also, was a Christian woman who used to go to church every day, and she would come visit him at the Kremlin and say, Mikhail, I went to church today. I prayed for the atheists. I prayed for you. And what people don't know that his wife, Raisa, her parents were killed by the Gestapo for having Christian photographs and what have you in their home. Mikhail Gorbachev's parents also had Christian photographs in their home, but they were hidden behind pictures of Lenin and Stalin.
Wow.
So they made it. His wife's parents didn't make it, but his grandmother was a Christian woman. My dad used to end every meeting with, "If it's God's will." And Mikhail Gorbachev said, "Well, I'm kind of an atheist, not a full-blown atheist. I never saw God in the room." But then he announced it really when he told the story. My grandmother was a Christian, and she prayed for atheists. She prayed for me. And I told him at that get-together we had at San Jose State University, I said, "You may not have seen God, but your grandmother prayed him into the room."
Wow.
And a lot got done. They got a lot done working together.
Wow.
All right, now my Cameron question. I had a Cameron question earlier. Is it's about the teddy bear from The Hunt for Red October. Where did that end up?
Who got that? Ends up Cameron's got the teddy bear for Hunt for Red October. Paramount Pictures, I think, is the one who did the movie, Hunt for Red October, and one of the producers of it had the bear and gave it to Dad, and Dad gave it to his grandson Cameron. So Cameron's got the bear.
That's so great.
For Red October. So that's great. And I remember one time I wrote my first book. My dad said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" I said, "Yeah, you can hold it up to the press as you're going to Camp David, and you can say, 'Best book I've written on I've read on my own family.'" Mike Reagan's book, which he did with Hunt for Red October, which was not that well known of a book, printed by Naval Press, right?
Yeah, Naval Institute Press.
Yeah, Naval Press. He'll this book to Sam Donaldson, and the rest is history. Oh yeah.
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 What was his relationship with Tom Clancy after that? Did they connect a few times after that?
I think they probably did, and what have you. But it's just Tom Clancy was very happy with.
Oh yeah.
Best book I've ever
Oh
read.
yeah, it's the blurb is on every book, or it was throughout the '80s anyway, and probably through the '90s. What was it? A darn good yarn or something like that. There's something a blurb that your dad gave that they latched onto that, and man, that went on every book since. So
you've got your hat. I've got one of those hats sitting at home, but I said, I'm going to wear mine today.
Yeah,
because I've got the USS Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
And a jacket from them.
Yep.
This over here is the flag of the USS Ronald Reagan. This is the flag my dad had when he was in the cavalry. He was in B team 322 and what have you. And they gave me this. I have my own program, Reagan Legacy Foundation.
Yep.
And we provide scholarships to men and women who serve aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. We've been doing that for quite a few years, and we do that. And love supporting the kids. We do something different. We also supply scholarships to the family members left at home, because people forget the family members serve as much as those in the field.
Yep.
They're waiting for the loved one to come home, and hopefully they come home. And so those families who are trying to better their education, they can get scholarships from us also. And we're just finishing up a program that we've had now for quite a few years, a brick project at St. Mary Église, Normandy, France. First town freed by America. 4 a.m. in the morning of D-Day, where we started a brick project a few years ago, where people could purchase a brick. And we're a 501c3, ReaganLegacyFoundation.org. Purchase a brick, put the name of it, loved one on there, how they served, and what have you, or just give us a check for $250. And we have plenty of names we can put on there. And we're putting it in the ground at St. Mary Église, Normandy, France, and has done such a great job. We've actually running out of space. So December 31st is like the last day we can take orders for the brick project at St. Mary Église. But I suggest anybody who goes to Normandy, go out to Pointe du Hoc and be in shock and say, they did what? Yeah. and go to St. Mary Église, first town freed by America. D-Day morning, because that's where Longest Day was filmed, and so many movies were filmed, and just meet the people there, and some of the stories you'll get from the men who bailed out of these planes on any given morning of D-Day.
Oh yeah, I encourage all Americans to take their families out there, especially in June, especially those first couple weeks in June. There are so many commemoration events surrounding D-Day, and I've taken my daughter and I have volunteered with the Best Defense Foundation to taking veterans back there to the battlefields on which they served, and for my daughter to hear, and we brought my son this time too, our youngest, who is 13 this summer, and he got to hear those stories from people who were first out of their landing craft, running across these beaches into a hail of machine gun fire, them telling him and my daughter where they went at the base of each cliff and how they worked their way up, and to hear those stories from those guys is
it's amazing. All my family's been there too, and they love it. I remember one year we were there for anniversary, and my dad was the first one to speak at Normandy on D-Day. Since then, every president since then has spoken on D-Day at Normandy. I remember speaking to one 92, 93-year-old gentleman who's 17 at the time, who bailed out Tandem, celebrating D-Day, and we were having lunch together a couple hours later, and some guy from the media ran up to him when he came landed and said, "What'd you think?" He said, "A lot better than last time. They were shooting at me."
It's fantastic. Oh my gosh. Absolutely incredible. And the Point to Hawks Beach, if people have not listened to that, they should go, they should read it. They should listen to it. So powerful. All of your father's speeches, just incredible. And it's ReaganLegacyFoundation.org. That's where people can go. And that'll be in the show notes. Everyone should go there, check that out, the BRIC Project and the scholarships for the men and women and their families of the USS Ronald Reagan. And I know I got to let you go, so I want to finish up with a couple quotes here. And this book right here, amazing. Thank you for putting this together. And I mean, he said so many incredible things. Republicans believe every day is the 4th of July, but Democrats believe every day is April 15th. I mean, he was so funny. There seemed to be an increasing awareness.
Nothing's changed.
No, there seems to be an increasing awareness of something we Americans have known for a long time, that the 10 most dangerous words in the English language are, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I mean, just incredible. And and then, of course, this one. I think we can end with this about freedom. It's the chapter on freedom right here. And this is in 1967, January 5th. And he says, "Freedom is a fragile thing and is never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people. Those who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again." So powerful.
It is. Absolutely. I was lucky. I lived history.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. Well, I want to thank you for taking this time today. I want to thank you for all you've done for the nation, all your family has given and sacrificed for this nation, and then all you're doing with the Reagan Legacy Foundation. Everyone should go there, ReaganLegacyFoundation.org. Check that out. Visit the library. Take your family to that library. And I sincerely appreciate your friendship and support.
Take care, my friend, and good. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for carrying it on, if you will. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this clip, click here to watch the full episode, or click here to watch another clip from the podcast.